Hello, my name is Dr Terri Simpkin and I'm an Associate Professor and Head of MBA Programs International at Nottingham University Business School. This presentation will focus on the prevalence of imposter phenomenon, or IP, in students, particularly those studying STEM subjects. And while there's a bit of a gap in the literature about women in physics and chemistry, we can draw on over 40 years of work and a raft of anecdotal evidence to establish a reasonable assumption about the experience of IP in this context. But what is IP? You may know it as imposter syndrome. It's actually not a syndrome. The original definition was devised by Pauline Rose-Clance and Susan Imes in their groundbreaking work, which was based on high-achieving women. They suggest that the imposter phenomenon is an intense feeling of intellectual phoniness despite successes. The work on imposter phenomenon has been much expanded since, and indeed recently there's been considerable interest in students, particularly those in higher education. This point about despite successes is a really key point. We're not speaking here of people who don't have capability for achievement, or people who have just sort of genuinely found themselves in a position where they shouldn't be. But it's about people who have capability for achievement, but who genuinely don't outwardly recognize their capacities. It's as if the rearview mirror that we might have to view our past successes or our achievements is broken or foggy or missing. Past achievements, successes, or capabilities are not carried forward as an expected future outcome. It's as if they never happened. Capabilities proven by success and objective measures such as results, awards, accolades, they are genuinely rationalized away in people who experience the imposter phenomenon. So let's have a look at why this is important and some of the other characteristics of it. As I said, 40 years of research has identified these types of characteristics. So there is a fascination with perfectionism beyond the healthy need to actually get things right. There's a fear of failure and scrutiny. I don't want to put myself out there in case I'm found wanting, and people will see that. People with IP will internalize failure, even if it is not within their realms of responsibility or within their remit. The flip side of that is that they will externalize successes. It was something else that made me achieve. I just got lucky, I was in the right place at the right time, or someone has made a mistake and I'm actually finding myself in this physics course by some fluke. There is a need to be the best, not one of the best, but the best, which leads to an indication of a thought pattern that suggests if I can't win, I don't want to play. And that leads to the next one, that people who experience IP genuinely want to be seen as special or outstanding, which is of course a bit of a paradox when we see this fear of failure. It is related to depression, anxiety, burnout and stress. And of course, in alignment with that there is self-handicapping. To avoid that fear of exposure and the anxiety that comes along with it, people will set up events or circumstances that outwardly prevent them from perhaps taking on tasks or courses or promotions, for example, that may put them into a position where they may be at risk of failure and scrutiny. One of the key elements is it is cyclical. It goes round and round and round, time and time and time again, and people just can't seem to get out of that cycle. It is that identifies the common misunderstanding and in some ways the trivialization in social and popular media that really in most cases identifies self-doubt that is relatively easy to get over in comparison to IP. And so we're seeing the weight of these types of characteristics and the consequences of them being dismissed or diminished in popular media stories. My research was on women in STEM. It is a continuing piece of research, a global program. The stats I'll talk to you about today are based on early research results on 506 responses to the Clance imposter phenomenon scale. I then followed that up with in-depth semi-structured interviews with 32 women from a range of occupations in STEM, such as civil engineers, medical doctors, sound engineers, chemists, and research scientists, for example. And they were from all career stages, so from early career, just coming straight out of university, to retirement age and moving out of the workforce. There is research to identify that around 70% of all of us will experience this at some point in their lives. It may be once, it may be ongoing, but certainly the research that I've undertaken on women in STEM, where usually underrepresented in the workforce, is that about 95% of women in non-traditional STEM occupations will actually experience IP, whether that be on a moderate, frequent, or intense level. So this is important when we start to think about how this plays out for our students, particularly those in science and more specifically those in physics and chemistry. There are similar narratives throughout the research that I've undertaken in comparison to previous research, and indeed research that is coming out as we speak. Researchers identified that unaddressed experiences of the imposter phenomenon due to a perception of otherness, particularly in university students, can adversely impact achievement, engagement, and retention. And that is across academic disciplines. Studies illustrate that IP has been associated with perceived minority stress, and this is particularly profound in women in certain sciences. And studies examining IP in relation to race reported psychological distress and lower self-esteem. So too, students perceiving themselves to come from lower socioeconomic class than their classmates will report lower engagement with university activities and less engagement with university communities. They will also have higher imposterous feelings. Other studies have found that female postgraduate students are more susceptible to academic stress than male students. Examination of the experience of nursing students, for example, suggests that anxiety, depression, and fear may result in a student who will fail to fulfill their potential. And other studies based on accounting students found that imposter experiences created barriers to learning and development as they moved into their professional competencies, their vocational capacities. Other consequences include isolation and an increase in intention to drop out of the program entirely. And indeed, some of the conversations I had with my participants overtly identified that they had swapped out from one science to another, where they were more likely to be in a cohort with a higher population of women. Unaddressed experiences of the imposter phenomenon is one factor that negatively impacts the experience and the achievement of our students. And this, of course, is a key concern where we're looking at engaging first in family students. We're trying to improve the participation of women in physics and chemistry. And once they're in, we want to hang on to them for improved retention and, of course, giving them the opportunities to have greater levels of achievement. So, what to do? Again, research identifies that peer mentoring can be particularly effective, but where individuals are looking outside of their own peer group, so perhaps taking science students and putting them with business students, because the direct comparison allows them to identify that there are different levels of achievement going on, and so they're not actually stacking themselves up against the business student as they would up against perhaps a chemistry or a physics student. Raising awareness, getting people to understand that yes, this is a thing. How we actually phrase our feedback and our praise to our students so they can't wriggle out of it and dismiss it as something else. Calling it out in the language, so identifying the language of IP in our students so that we can gently identify that perhaps their examination of their own success and putting it onto something else is not necessarily accurate. Having a look at their own stories, the narratives that they've actually built for themselves, perhaps through previous study or from their families. Having a look at our structures around assessment and our processes, perhaps in retention and recruitment, for example, and of course ongoing research. So for some time, the higher education sector has been concerned with an imperative to expand participation and improve opportunities for traditionally underrepresented groups, such as those from low socioeconomic backgrounds, first in family, and of course women in physics and chemistry specifically. This is of course is important where enrolments are disproportionately low for women and attrition for women may be disproportionately high. Extant literature indicates that higher education environment can manifest or exacerbate feelings of IP, and where there is this perception of otherness, we can make some interventions to diminish that ongoing cyclical imposter phenomenon response. Given a widespread commitment to policy supporting and broadening participation of underrepresented groups, we do need to do more research to inform how the imposter phenomenon as a barrier to entry, as a barrier to achievement, and a barrier to university engagement can be diminished. I look forward to perhaps speaking with you further about this if you're interested, and I thank you for your time and your attention. Thank you very much.